Uh,
I'm open.
okay.
Okay.
So just talk to John.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And, yeah, that'll be fun.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll.
Julie, what's your full name?
My full name is Julie Jane Rivet Lang Meintel.
Okay. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Columbus, Ohio, in October of 1970.
When did you join the military?
I joined the military. My enlistment date is September 7th of 1991.
Okay. Why did you join?
I joined the military. I was looking for something. I had finished high school and college wasn't in the cards for me at that point in my life. And I worked at a couple of different jobs and I was just sort of drifting. And I met and dated a boy who was in the military, and it just seemed like there was a quality that he had. He loved his work, and it was fascinating to me, and I wanted to find out more. So I called a recruiter, and we had a few conversations, and I took a physical and a test, and then I signed on the dotted line.
What branch did you go into?
I joined the Air Force Reserve.
And what kind of training did you have?
In the Air Force Reserve, you go through the same kind of basic training and technical training for your job that active duty trainees go through as well. I went to a 6-week basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. And as a result of some of the testing that I did, I was placed in a career field. So from basic training, I went to the job training that I would do once I was back to my home unit in Columbus. I went to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I trained to become a command post controller. That was my first career field.
And what does a command post controller do?
The most important, the biggest two jobs that a command post controller does is they manage all the flight following, all of the flights that a flying unit is undertaking, whether it's local training or if they're flying a mission or if they're whatever they're doing. The command post follows the flights and they handle all the emergency actions. It's kind of a clearinghouse for all the information that's pertinent to the unit and to the flying unit.
Now, were you able to act as a command post controller in Columbus?
Yes.
And where would that be?
That was at my unit at the time was the 907th Tactical Airlift Group, and it was stationed at Rickenbacker Air National Guard Base in Columbus.
Okay. Now, I do know in the Army Reserve you have monthly meetings. Is it different in the Air Force?
No, it's the same. We call it a UTA. It stands for Unit Training Assembly, or some people would refer to it as Drill Weekend. Most people that I know and that I work with call it UTA. We do that one weekend a month, and then we are required to do 15 days of what we call annual tour, 15 days of active duty orders at some point during the fiscal year. It does not have to be 2 weeks all at once or however many. It doesn't have to be any particular configuration of days. You can do them one at a time. You can do them all at once. But you have to do 15 every year.
No, those 15 days, are they usually someplace out of Columbus, or do you perhaps do them in Columbus at smaller intervals?
You would typically drill with your unit where it's stationed.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people would go and do annual tours other places. Sometimes units would plan an entire annual tour for a work section or a work group, and maybe they would go to another base and augment another active duty unit or something along those lines. But for myself, I just typically do my annual tour and my UTAs at home station right now.
Now, in the reserves, were you ever activated as a unit?
My unit was, at that point, the 907th was activated in support of Operation Desert Storm in the early 90s, and that's when I was going through the process of the testing and the physical and getting into the Air Force. So I did not go with them at the time, but I was activated as an individual later on. My unit eventually did move from Columbus to Wright Patterson in Dayton.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you living in Columbus?
Can I interrupt for
Sure.
a second? We've got a little bit of a undergarment issue.
Oh,
No, this is
I
need
think
to
Oh.
click it to it. We didn't want that.
sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
That's
okay.
awkward.
I didn't want
It's
you
all
to
right.
go.
It wasn't.
No.
I wasn't
See my
really
brow
seeing
strap
it.
the whole time.
She
There you go.
picked it out.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. On that note.
Okay, on that note,
I forget what was my last question. I forget.
we were
Activating?
talking about activate.
To
Ac-
Right,
yeah,
right down there.
activated
You
as a
They were
unit.
called up to Desert Storm.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was when my unit was in Columbus. They were called up to Desert Storm.
Okay. And now the unit then moved to Wright Pat.
Yes,
Were you still living in Columbus at the time?
I was.
Okay.
I was. There was an order that came down from higher headquarters in the Air Force that our unit was converting from one type of aircraft to another, and Rickenbacker was no longer going to be able to accommodate the larger aircraft, and there was a move that was planned. We moved to Wright Patterson Air Force Base in 1993.
Well, what kind of aircraft did you have initially, and what kind of aircraft did you move to?
When I joined the unit, the 907th was flying C-130 cargo airplanes, and we transitioned to C-141 cargo airplanes.
So they're both cargo.
Yes,
And these are the large things where vehicles and everything else go in.
yes.
But one was larger than the other?
I believe that's the case. I'm not super familiar with all the ins and the outs of different kinds of airplanes, but yes, a C-130 is smaller than a C-141, and it probably had things to do with the number of aircraft that we were going to have, the hangar space that was available at Rickenbacker versus what was available at Wright-Patterson, what the runway was stressed for in terms of the weight when the airplane lands. I'm sure there were a number of factors that I'm not even aware of that went into that decision.
Now, did you stay in that same job, or have you been in that same job all time in your career in the reserves?
No, I have had several different career fields in the reserve, but at the time of the move, I was still a command post controller. I stayed in the command post until 1995, late 1995, when I went to school to become a C-141 Loadmaster.
Loadmaster.
Yes.
Now, what rank are you as a command post controller?
When I joined the military, I had no rank at all. I had 0 stripes. And they used to call us slick sleeves because we didn't have any stripes at all or any insignia at all on our sleeves. And I earned senior, or not, I'm sorry, not senior. I earned staff sergeant as a command post controller. I went up to staff sergeant, which is 4 stripes.
Now, a loadmaster, is that a lateral move or is that a promotion?
Well, the job itself isn't necessarily a promotion. The rank is independent of the job. But it was, for me, it felt like a big promotion because I became part of the air crew and I got to fly on the airplanes and travel. And I loved that.
And what does a loadmaster do then?
A loadmaster is responsible for the weight and balance calculations on the airplane. You load plan whatever cargo you're going to pick up and take to another location. You load plan it out for the maximum fuel efficiency. You do there's a form that you fill out for every takeoff, and it's a weight and balance form. We were responsible for if there was troop movement. A lot of times, instead of carrying cargo, we would fill the airplane up with troops if they were moving somewhere or their equipment. And we also did air medical evacuation on the C-141, in which case we would work with the air medical evacuation crews and flight nurses, and the back of the airplane would basically be configured like a flying hospital.
Does the loadmaster have to be concerned with where something is in the aircraft?
Yes, absolutely. Where the weight is in the back of the aircraft determines if the aircraft flies, how it flies, the fuel efficiency, safety, all of that. That's what goes into load planning.
Now, as a member of the reserve, how big did being a loadmaster affect your normal reserve activities? Were you now there longer because you're flying places?
Yes, yes. There are a number of people who are flyers in the reserve that is basically their full-time job. It doesn't have to be, but flying requires more training and more currency. You have to maintain your currency, and that takes more time and more work basically than say my career as a command post controller. Once I attained a certain level of proficiency, then I could work on a drill weekend and I could sort of just maintain, and that didn't require as much time. But to maintain proficiency and currency as a flyer, you have to actually fly, and that just obviously takes more time.
Were you flying out of Wright Pat?
Yes.
And where would you go, typically?
We went all over the world. We went all over the world. I have flown missions where we started at Wright Pat, literally circumnavigated the globe and came back to Wright Pat. It was very exciting. It's just a lot of fun.
How long would that take?
I think those missions took 10 days, 2 weeks maybe. It's been a long time since I did that type of trip, so it's kind of hard to remember exactly how long it was. But it was around in the neighborhood of 2 weeks.
Now, with that kind of flying, your monthly weekend commitment and your 15 days in the summer, you expand far beyond that, right?
Yes, far beyond that.
Yeah. Now, was it difficult being a female Loadmaster?
I personally never really had any problems with it. I can recall one or two, maybe a handful of incidents where the fact that I was a female was noticed or it was an issue in any way. But most of the time, almost everybody that I ever flew with in my unit was very professional about it. We were doing a job, and we were a crew, and we worked together. Like I said, I have memory of just a couple of incidents where the fact that I was a female was noticed.
Now, well, these are on C-140s, is it?
C-141s.
141.
Yes.
Now, how big a crew is on a C-141?
The basic crew complement would be 5 people, but we would often have more than 5. You have 2 pilots, 2 flight engineers, and a loadmaster. But a lot of times there might be people training. You might have pilots who are in training. You might have engineers who are in training. You might have loadmasters who are in training. If the days were going to be especially long, we would have extra crew members just to kind of give people a break. I would say that the average crew that I flew with was maybe 7 or 8 people, maybe 9 sometimes, 3 in each crew position.
Now, you're the loadmaster, but the people doing the loading are from the base where the plane is at that time. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're telling them where to put things and what have you. Do you have to go around and are you responsible to make sure these items, whether they be vehicles or what have you, are secure?
Yes. We were responsible for making sure that the tie down was, excuse me, was right. Basically, make sure that they were using the proper types of tie down and that there was enough restraint applied to any particular piece of cargo, whether it was a vehicle, a Humvee. I never saw tanks myself, but there's any number of things that you could put on an airplane, and we always had to make sure that the restraint was proper. That was part of the weight and balance calculations, as far as making sure that where the items are placed in the airplane, and that they wouldn't move during flight.
How many vehicles could you fit in a C-141?
That would depend on the kind of vehicle it was.
Yeah. What's the most you've ever seen in one you've been associated with?
The number of vehicles?
Yes.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I honestly can't remember.
Any idea how many troops you've ever moved from one place to another?
We could carry hundreds.
Now, do they somehow transform the C-141 and how the interior, when you go from cargo to the human passengers?
Yes.
So how does that transformation take place?
Well, it takes a lot of time. The way that the floor is configured, the floor is made up of basically strips of metal, and you can take the strips of metal, flip them over. They're flat on one side, and they have rollers on the other side. And so a lot of times cargo will be built up on metal. They're aluminum pallets. It's just basically it's just a big square of aluminum, and you pile things and you stack things and you tie them down on the pallets. And then you can bring the pallet to the back of the airplane on a forklift or on what we call the K-loader, which was basically a flatbed truck that also had rollers, and you would just roll it from the truck into the plane. And then there are locks in both sides of the aircraft that would fit into the cutouts in the side of the pallet. And you would just lock the pallet into place. There were pallet positions. There were certain pallet positions within the airplane. And we had, on the 141, we had 13 pallet positions, so we could fill it up with 13 pallets of cargo. And that could be anything from household goods to anything. Anything you can imagine, almost, we could probably put it on a plane.
Now, when you're carrying passengers, do they have seats like a jumbo jet, or are they against the wall, as I sometimes seen them in photographs?
There's both. We have what we call sidewall seats, and they're canvas seats, and there's a little metal frame, and they just kind of fold down out of the side, and you can sit down on them, and there are seat belts. And then, depending on the number of passengers and the way that the mission is supposed to run, the configuration, there are what we called airline seats, and they were kind of odd because they faced backwards, which was a little disconcerting, but they were not as big or as comfortable as an airline seat. They were pretty small, and if we were trying to cram a lot of people in.
people often complain about airline seats not being comfortable, but you're saying these weren't as comfortable as they were.
They were old.
Yeah.
The 141, when I was flying on it, was a very old airplane, and it was being phased out. And so the any improvements, they weren't making improvements to it at that point in time. The seats, the airline seats, were pretty old. They were actually on, they would actually be on pallets as well. And you would just put them. We didn't always do the configuration. The ground loading teams would work on the configuration a lot of times for the airplanes. When we showed up to the airplane, we would be alerted a certain amount of time before the scheduled takeoff time, and then we would go and talk to the crew about what we were doing. This is the mission that we're doing. Here's what we need from everybody, and then we would go out to the airplane to see what the cargo was. We would talk to the organization that we talked to on the ground. They were called Aerial Port, and they were in charge of the flow of cargo, and they would bring it out to us, and they were the loaders. And sometimes we just oversaw the loading of the airplane, and sometimes we participate in it. A lot of times we would participate in it and push pallets side by side. But they did a lot of the configuring.
Once you unload your cargo, how long of a layover do you normally have?
It would depend on the mission.
Did you ever fly out that same day?
Mm-hmm. A lot of times we might have 2 or 3 or 4 legs in a day, or we might have one long leg, or we might have it would depend on the mission. It was so variable, and sometimes we would stay overnight places, and we'd have what we called minimum ground time or min crew rest, and we would have to get up and go the next day, and then other times we'd have a little bit more time. It varied widely with every time we got on the airplane, it was something different.
Did you usually load the aircraft with cargo going the opposite direction, or did you fly empty?
We would usually leave Wright Patterson empty and go pick something up and take it someplace else. There was a period of time when we would go to Dover Air Force Base in Dover, Delaware, and we'd pick up a full load of cargo and carry it over to Europe. We could take it to Germany, to Ramstein Air Base, and we did a lot of back and forth that way. But we almost, I don't even know if I want to say almost always, but we often left Wright Pat empty and came back empty.
So Wright Pat is more or less where the hangars where the aircraft are stored, but
Yes.
generally the cargo is not at Wright Pat.
Generally, that's true.
Now, how long were you a Loadmaster?
I was a Loadmaster for 5 years.
Then what happened to your career?
Well, then I had gotten married and I started my family, and my husband was a flyer at the time also, and we felt like it was really important that one of us should be home with the kids, and I really wanted it to be me. So I quit flying to raise my family, and I found a ground job that allowed me to stay in my unit, to stay in the flying squadron, but I no longer had to fly, so I could stay home and raise my kids.
And what job was that?
It's called Aviation Resource Management.
And what does an aviation resource manager do?
We were responsible for cutting the flight orders. Every time the airplane takes off, you have to have a flight order, a flight authorization. We would make sure that those were all in order every time. We kept track of all of the flyers' currency items. The pilots have a certain list of items that they need to perform so many landings in a period of time in order to stay current. They need to perform so many takeoffs, so many landings. They call them touch and goes, so that when they would practice in the local area, they would just do touch and goes. They would take off and land, and take off and land, and take off and land. Mm-hmm. And flight engineers had a certain number of currency items. We would track everybody's currency. There's all kinds of administrative paperwork that needs to be done, all kind of administrative tracking that needed to be done in a flying squadron, and that's what I did.
Now, were you doing this outside of Wright Pat still?
No.
Where was this then?
I was still at Wright Pat. I had to go to school for it, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
that was a finite, 6-week course that I had to go take training at another base. But then I came back and worked at Wright Patterson.
Okay.
My unit has always been at Wright Patterson.
Now, does this have a more normal reserve look as far as your time commitment, or could it still be more than just a weekend being involved in this activity?
Honestly, at the time, it depends on what each individual person wanted. There's always There's always work to be done. I could just do my drill weekend and my 15 days of annual tour, and I could do more if I wanted to. What I think a lot of people don't realize is that a reserve unit still runs 30 days a month, even if the people that belong to the unit are not on active duty. There are civilian GS employees that run the unit, and a lot of the GS employees are also reservists. It's just a different composition, a different way to man the unit, but the unit still runs just like an active duty unit does.
Now, are you still in that resource management?
I am not.
What are you doing now?
Right now, I'm sort of in a limbo state because I am trying to go back to flying. But in the meantime, when I left the aviation resource management field, I went into the history career field. I became my unit's historian for 12 years.
And what does a historian of a unit do?
What we were responsible for was keeping track of what the unit does all through the year. We would write a comprehensive report once a year that was submitted to Air Force Reserve Command, and ultimately those reports are destined for the Air Force Historical Research Agency archives at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. And we would basically decide what was historically significant that the unit had been doing and that the unit had been working on through the year. I would interview commanders, and I would go and talk to people who had been on noteworthy missions. If we had done something that was especially, the phrase that we used a lot was historically significant, because a lot of what we do is basic, day-to-day stuff that is not going to end up in the history book. It's not going to be interesting to anybody, but we often did things that were. And so those were important to record and talk about, talk to the people who actually did those things, who actually participated in those events, and write it down.
Now, what unit are you the historian of, or were you?
I was with the 445th Airlift Wing.
445th.
Yeah.
Now, as you were saying, this is not necessarily for public consumption. It's more or less the unit history to report to the Air Force and to the Pentagon what this unit has been doing.
Yes. Yes. The unit has a division or a section that's called Public Affairs, and they are the ones who, when you see somebody being interviewed on the flight line at Wright Patterson, Public Affairs sets that up. Public Affairs is in charge of that. Public Affairs writes the newsletter for the unit, and they coordinate with local media, and they are the ones who put out the information that is for public consumption. It's not that anything that I'm writing is not necessarily something that the public couldn't see. It's just that it's more for internal uses.
Is it rather cut and dry, this particular plane flew this particular mission, unloaded this, and then flew back? Or do you actually interview the crew as to things that might have happened along the way, or getting some personal insight as to what they saw or what they did?
My personal habit was, because I've been with this unit for my entire career, basically, my personal habit was I wanted to know more about the personal side of it. I wanted to know the stories. I wanted to know what was going on. How did you guys work together as a crew? What was going on with everybody during this mission, during this emergency? I really wanted to know more of the personal side of it. But for historical purposes, really what they want is the information about this airplane went here and picked up this and did that, and this is the crew. But it was not necessarily as personal as I would have wanted it to be.
So you did talk to other people than just the pilot, is that correct?
Oh yes.
Now, with the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, how did that affect your reserve activities?
When we first went into Iraq, when Operation Iraqi Freedom kicked off, I was still in the aviation resource management section, and my unit the entire unit was not activated, but large parts of the unit were. The flying squadrons were activated, and a lot of people wanted to. A lot of it was voluntary, and my squadron was activated, and I was on active duty for 13 months. Excuse me. And we did what we called staging air crews out of Wright Patterson. The 141's useful life was really winding down at that point, and there were a very limited number of units that actually flew the 141 and had the parts to maintain it and to fly it, and we were one of them. And we had the biggest, we were centrally located of those units, and we had the biggest facilities to manage that sort of operation. So we had crews from McCord Air Force Base in Washington and Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. And then Wright Patterson was sort of a central location where they would come to Wright Patterson, and then they would go to fly the units or fly the missions to Europe and to the Middle East.
When were these 13 months of active duty?
I was ordered to active duty in February of 2003, and then I got off active duty in 2004.
Which one of those several jobs you've had so far in your story were you in at that time? Were you with the Loadmaster, or were you the controller?
No, I was in aviation resource management.
Okay.
And flying missions, flying operational missions in that type of situation was a little bit different. So there were some added duties that we had to do. At that time, every time an airplane would take off, the crew would take basically a briefcase full of forms and papers, and now it's all on tablets. It's much easier for the crew to manage those on their own, but we had to make sure that the forms were all filled up. All of the forms were stocked within that briefcase, and they had crews had to sign out. Crews had to sign out different kinds of equipment. They had different means of communication, different kinds of phones that they could use, and different kinds of not walkie-talkies. That's not the right word, but just means of communications from Europe back to the United States. And there were some other items that they needed to sign out that we needed to keep track of.
Now, you're still in the reserves.
I am.
You were no longer the historian of the unit?
No, I am not.
You're in limbo. Do you want to become a Loadmaster again?
I am working through the process to become requalified as a Loadmaster. My unit has transitioned airplanes once again, and we're flying the C-17s now. And I'm working through the process to become requalified to fly.
Now, the C-17 versus the C-141, you have to know the dimensions and the weight capacity and other things about the
Yes.
plane.
Yes. Excuse me. It'll involve a training school that I need to go to.
Water?
I'm fine, thank
Okay, all right.
Okay.
you. I just have a little
Okay.
Well,
Good.
tickle in my throat.
What's your current rank?
My current rank is Senior Master Sergeant. I'm in the E8.
How many years have you been in the reserves now?
I am coming up on finishing my 26th year at this point.
Do you have a goal before you retire? Or
In terms of years? or-
years?
Not really. Not really. I learned a while ago that I don't want to make too many hard and fast plans because life happens and things that you don't expect come down the pike. So I'm keeping my mind open. My current enlistment contract runs out in December, and I'm eligible for re-enlistment, and it's very likely that I will. But if for some reason my application to go back to flying is denied, then I probably will retire at that point because I'm too high ranking to do much else, to start over somewhere else, and I have too many years in to start over somewhere else.
Now, do you have, when I mentioned the word goal, you wanted to know if it was just in years, but do you have a military goal you wish to, besides going back to being flying again?
Not really. No, I really have accomplished and gotten to do so much more than I ever dreamed I would. When I first enlisted, I wouldn't have believed that I would stay the 20 years. I was looking for something, and I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I sure found it. And I wouldn't have thought at that point, though, that I would stay this long. So I'm open to whatever's coming.
You know, 20 plus years in the reserves in a variety of different jobs. How has the Air Force changed in your tenure?
Oh, it's changed in a lot of ways, I think. That's hard to. That's kind of hard to quantify, honestly. There are some things that have changed for the better, and there are some things that, in my opinion, have changed, and I kind of liked the way they used to do things.
Has the attitude of the Air Force changed at all, or the feeling of being part of the Air Force?
Not for me, no. No. know, I get a lot of satisfaction out of being part of the Air Force and being part of something that is bigger than my little corner of the world and contributing to a larger effort. I like to think of the Air Force and the military and the United States, for that matter, as a force for good, and it's satisfying to be part of that.
Well, let's expand upon that a little bit. You've invested 20 plus years of your life. You wish to go on. How do you feel about being part of the American military?
About being part of the American military? I take a lot of pride in it.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. Appreciate you sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for being interested.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. It's my privilege. It really is.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Absolutely.
You like the personal stories, so
I do.
tell me how you met the man that became your husband.
We were in the same flying squadron.
Yeah?
Yeah, I worked the way that the building was set up. The command post was upstairs, and the flying squadron, like the desk where everybody would kind of show up before their missions, was downstairs. And I was always running up and down the stairs because the command post and the flying squadron worked really closely together, and we just kept bumping into each other. And there was when we were leaving Rickenbacker, that was going to be our last drill weekend at Rickenbacker. You know, we had a big party and a big celebration sort of thing, and we met and sat down and had a couple of drinks, and we just were talking, and it just kind of went from there.
Are you guys then separated a lot because he's flying at that time? He was flying.
Yes.
How that,
Yes. When we were both flying, it was. We understood each other's jobs, so we each had a supportive spouse, which is in that kind of career field where you spend so much time apart, you have to have the support. You just have to, or it's never going to work. And we were very supportive of each other, and we would try to coordinate our flying schedules as best we could, and that was just how it was for us. And then when the kids came along and I stayed home, it got harder. It got harder because I still missed flying. I don't think I made a mistake in quitting flying to stay home with my children, but I missed it. I missed it all along, and that's why my oldest son just graduated from high school, and my other two sons are teenagers, and they're like, "Go do what you want, Mom." And the opportunity fell in my lap. I never thought it would. I really never thought it would. I had, for a short time when I was still in the history career field, I went to work for another unit because there was more promotion possibility in this other unit. But I got there, and the environment was completely different, and it was a different mission. It just wasn't a very good fit. So I stayed there for a while, and I tried to kind of make good on my promise to them, and it didn't work out very well. And I was asking some friends in my old unit, would there be any place for me to come back? And one of the guys who trained me to be a loadmaster the first time, now he is the chief loadmaster for my unit, and he said, "I'll hire you back." And I said, "Really?" I really truly did not think that was ever going to happen to me. It was never going to happen for me. And so when he said he would hire me back, I was like, I could have kissed him. I jumped on it, and so we've been trying to work through that process. It's a little bit convoluted, given that I have 26 years in, and I'm an E8, and so I have a limited number of years left that I can serve, and frankly, they're gonna have to pay me more than they'd have to pay somebody at a lower rank.
Are you allowed to talk about missions?
Yes.
Do you remember any special mission that you can talk about?
Oh gosh, there were a lot of good missions. There was one mission that I can give credit to my unit for, and it was, I don't know that it was on the news that our unit was part of it, but the mission itself was definitely on the news. When I don't know if you all remember Bo Bergdahl, the Army sergeant who was captured by the Taliban years and years ago. When he came home, when they released him, My unit was the one to pick him up and bring him back to the United States. Or we brought him back to the United States. That was pretty cool. There's not a lot that I know about that mission, but I did write about it for the history. For myself personally, there were some missions that I had a really, really good time on. There were some that I felt like were professional accomplishments for me. The most meaningful missions to me, they were emotionally, I think they were pretty difficult, but in the flying world, just in the military, there's always an acronym for everything. And when we would fly what we'd call HRs, human remains, soldiers, airmen, soldiers who had passed away, and we would bring them home. That was always very meaningful, because you feel like you're bringing somebody home to their family. At the risk of sounding maybe a little melodramatic, you're bringing a brother or a sister home to their family, a brother or sister in arms, and no matter what happened to them, you're bringing them home. And that there was a certain amount of satisfaction in that. I mean, it's very sad, it's very emotional, and the family comes out to the airplane to meet the casket, and it's emotionally difficult sometimes, but there was a sort of, I guess, a sense of satisfaction. That's the only word I can come up with for it.
When you're on these HR missions, is there usually more than one remains, or are there multiples, or?
Depends. It depends.
Is there any special treatment or service provided because you're dealing with remains?
Oh, yes. There's always an escort. Somebody's always escorting them. Like a supervisor or a friend or somebody from their unit is escorting them home. The casket is on a silver pallet by itself. Nothing else is on it. It's draped in a flag, and there is a ceremony of sorts to bringing them on and bringing them off the airplane. And
Does the escort sit next to the casket?
Never. I can't speak for when they're not on the airplane or when I don't see them, but the escort is with them from the moment that they leave until the moment they're delivered to their family.
Are most of those remains brought back to Dover, or are they brought back other places?
Most of them are brought back to Dover. Dover has I think the largest Mortuary Affairs unit in the Air Force, and they handle all of that.
And that's in Delaware?
Yes.
correct?
And these are all Air Force people?
They might not necessarily be Air Force. We carried cargo, and we carried all sorts of things for other services as well. We've worked for the Marines, and we've worked for the Army. Not so much with the Navy, maybe a little bit. I don't remember as much with the Navy, but a lot of Army or Marines. It could be anybody.
So is the escort a certain Army or a certain military group, or are they just an escort?
In my experience, it was usually somebody that was close to that person, the person who passed, like a supervisor maybe, or a friend, somebody from their unit. I haven't done a lot of those. I've done a few.
The most memorable non-military experience that you never would have had it not been for the military service, something that happened or you saw or whatever. You get to go all over the world, right?
I have a picture of myself at home, and I got to be very good friends with one of the pilots in the unit. She and I became very good friends, and we're still friends to this day. We used to fly together a lot, and we went on a mission. We used to do these 3-week missions called SIDS. It stood for Strategic Intra-Theater Deployment, and we were gone for 3 weeks. And we went to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and we started there. And as I was trying to kind of explain the whole staging process at Wright Pat when we were activated for Operation Iraqi Freedom, we would stage out of Ramstein. That was kind of our home base for 3 weeks, and we would fly all over Europe and all over the Middle East taking cargo. And sometimes we got lucky enough to have some time off in some really neat places. And I have a picture of my good friend Rachel and myself, and then a flight engineer who was a good friend of ours, and a crew chief. We were on horseback at the base of the Egyptian pyramids.
Oh, that's-
Really, really cool. So that was not a military thing, but there's no way in the world I would have ever been there except for the Air Force.
Is your husband still in the reserves?
He is not.
Did he continue as a flyer?
He retired from the reserve in 2007, and he continues to fly. He's a commercial airline pilot.
Jamie Vandergriff, do you know her? Vandergriff's her maiden name.
Jamie Rotello.
Rotella, yes,
I do.
yes.
I do.
Yeah, did you know her prior to living in the Lebanon area, or because she was in the Air Force
She
also?
and I were in the same unit.
Oh, is that right?
Her husband and she and her husband were in the same unit with myself and my husband. We all used to. I wouldn't say that we're not friends anymore. We just our paths don't cross as much anymore because life happens.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, we used to be. I used to consider Jamie a good friend.
I taught her years ago.
Wow.
She was in the 7th grade.
There's a funny story involving Jamie and my husband when they were on a trip. That's off the record, but they flew. I don't know. I'm trying to even remember where they flew. Somewhere it might have been in Puerto Rico or Panama somewhere. But Jamie was on my husband's crew, and they were flying, and they had partaken of adult beverages. And they called me, and they were just being silly, and they called room service and ordered every single thing on the menu and had it sent to Matt's room. Just silly stuff like that, you know. But there was some adult beverage involved.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
That'll be our lead story.
Yes. Let's not put that on the website. We'll get everybody in trouble.
If it's possible.
Yeah. All set, Zach?
Yep.
Okay. Zach, what's your full name?
Zachary Lykins.
When were you born?
I was born on May 23rd, 1989.
And where was that?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Okay. When did you enlist into the service?
2007.
Okay, and why did you enlist?
Born and raised in it.
Okay. So it's a family tradition?
Yes.
Besides your father, were there generations before that also?
Yep. Both my grandpas were in, and all of their brothers were. After a few generations, as far as I could tell, I was the first Marine. So everyone was Army or Navy.
Where did you do your basic training?
My basic training was at Parris Island, South Carolina.
Is that where all Marines are trained?
All the males, east coast of the Mississippi goes to Parris Island. If they're west of the Mississippi, then they go to Camp Pendleton.
Okay.
But all the females across the nation goes to South Carolina.
Okay. Outside of basic, what kind of training did you have after that?
After that, I went to Camp Geiger, which is part of Camp Lejeune in North Carolina for Marine combat training. So simplified infantry. Then after that, went to Huntsville, Alabama for my MOS school, which was ammunition specialist technician or ammo tech. So I was in charge of all the ammunition for my unit.
What kind of ammunition are we talking about?
Going from the simple blanks to pretty much as high as what I was in charge of was a 155 millimeter artillery rounds.
Okay, so the ammo tech, as you said, is in charge of the entire range.
Yes.
Okay. Would that be a platoon in the company or something like that?
My job is very small. Most of the ammo techs would go to the ASP or the ammunition supply point. I was lucky enough to get put with an actual unit. Depending on where you were at, if you were infantry, then there's maybe 3 per battalion. But for me, because I went to artillery, there was at most 3 of us per battery or platoon.
What unit were you a member of then?
Bravo Battery, 1st Battalion, 10th Marines.
And so after your training as an ammo tech and what have you, where was your first station after your training was done?
Camp Lejeune.
And how long were you there?
For the remainder of my time was like 3.5 years. Was what I had left.
Were you sent overseas at any time?
Yes.
And where did you go?
Went to Kajaki, Afghanistan, protecting the hydroelectricity dam from Al Qaeda.
Where in Afghanistan is that located?
It's Helmand. It's in Helmand province. It's right where the mountains start to form. I can't really pinpoint.
Is it near Pakistan, or is it?
I
Okay. But it's near the mountains, you were saying.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a hydroelectric plant there, and you are protecting it.
Yes.
What does that plant do?
It provides electricity to all of southern Helmand, and I think to some of the residing provinces.
So it's a good part of the country.
Yes.
And not only are you protecting the civilian power, I'm sure you're also protecting the military equivalent to a degree.
Yes. Where we were at, we were most northern FOB, or forward operating base. But all of our supplies had to get flown in, so it was just us. We had maybe a handful of national security that we helped train, but they weren't attached to our base. They actually had had their own.
How many people were in your base?
Roughly, maybe 300 people.
Were they all part of the 10th Marines?
No, we were the majority. I think we were sitting at 250, and the rest was either EOD, explosive ordnance, the ones that blows up the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. Then we had a few actual infantry guys that were the main force to train the Afghan police, and they would go out on two patrols with us. Other than that, it was mostly us.
Was it strictly Marines there as far as American
Yes.
services go? Did you go out on patrol? As an
Yes,
ammo
I
tech?
actually begged to go out because I was bored, stuck on base. I was like, you got to get me out.
So, but if you wanted to, you didn't have to go on a patrol then. Is that true?
Where I was sitting at, no. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. That's what I signed up for. I didn't sign up just to sit behind a desk.
So if, and you would be behind a desk as an ammo tech then?
Yes.
Because you're keeping track of what is needed and what's going out
Yes.
as far as ammo goes. Now, when you go out on patrol, your job is something different then, right?
Yes. You're going out, talking to the locals there, trying to be as friendly as you can, trying to win hearts and minds, and just try to make sure the area is safe, that no one's planted any IEDs. If the enemy is nearby, try to push them back. So.
Is this a squad going out or a platoon?
Yes, it's a squad. It usually consists about, say, between 10 to 20 guys.
And is there a sergeant in charge of the squad?
Yes. There's a sergeant who's in charge of the squad, and then from there it's broken up into fire teams, which is about 4 Marines, and there's usually about 3 to 4 in each as squad.
Now, in order to go out with this squad, who did you have to get permission from? The sergeant or higher above that?
Just my chief, and then as long as the sergeant was okay that I could go out, I was in.
How long would the squad be out?
It depend. It depend if it could be 2 hours. It could be 8. Just depend on what the mission was. And then there was a few one time where we did an overnight out of a base.
Now, did you get into any firefights on those squads?
Yeah.
Those patrols?
About day 2, 3, we got called up to one of the hills, and I was towards the back end because I didn't train with the guys, so I was part of the back end, and then I got called up, which was funny because my sergeant was like, "Lykins, you asked for it. Get your butt up here." I went, "Roger." So I ran up, and what was an actual firefight. It was just they're firing off a few shots. First, we didn't have PID or positive ID because they would go inside their homes, or as what we called compounds, and they would shoot through what we called murder holes, which are the holes already in the walls from previous in engagements. So we didn't have real location. We just heard the rounds fly over our head, which will make you duck.
Yeah.
But we're like, well, we can't do anything, so what do we do?
Now, you said these patrols, one of their functions is to win over the hearts and minds of the locals. Was that easy, or was that difficult?
Half the people there wanted to help us, the other half didn't want us there. So it was easy and it wasn't. Had to watch out for the kids because they would try to be sneaky, either try to trade you stuff or try to get candy or try to steal it from your pouches because they knew that we had them there. So, but overall, they're just being kids, working out in the fields with their families, just kids being kids.
Now, as I understand it, it's not as simple as some people think. It's not just the Al-Qaeda and the regular citizen of Afghanistan. There's a lot of different tribal groups or ethnic groups. Did you come across that sort of thing too?
I didn't because I was stuck on base.
Yeah.
So I can't say much about it, but it is harder now than compared to, say, the Korean War and World War II, because those were the last, as what we called a uniformed war, which was the actual men and women in uniform going up against each other. Now it's this guerrilla warfare where it's me being in uniform and saying you trying to attack me, but I don't know that you're the enemy because you're in civilian clothes.
Now, when you went back to base, what was life like on the base? Were there buildings, or did you live out of tents?
We were lucky enough to actually have already built homes. When we took over, we got it from the Britons, so it was already done up. And when they had it, the Russians was there. So these were already built homes that we ended up kind of taking, but they haven't had any locals living in them for quite a few decades.
Yeah, because I was thinking it had to be 40 years or so.
Yeah.
Or older. What was living conditions like besides structures already being good? Did you have fairly decent meals, or?
Just well, for me it'd be a typical meal, but we had our MREs. Then we had kind of made like big squad size MRE meals that we had.
What does MRE stand for?
Meals ready to eat.
Okay.
So.
And would they be the same as C rations or K rations?
Yeah, they're. We've been told they're a little bit better than the C rats or the K rats. They're preserved better. They're packaged better. Only thing is that we don't get cigarettes in them.
Yeah. Now, did they have to be heated, or do you boil them in water or something?
It depended on you. You didn't have to heat them up, but you could, and they had a little here. You put like that much water, and it actually heats up to where they could almost be as hand warmers, just a little bit hotter.
Yeah. Was the base ever under attack?
Not when we were there, no. But when we got there, we got told that when the Russians had it, they that area did get overwhelmed, and you could see the holes from the rounds. So,
Were there shower facilities or things like that at the base?
yeah, we had a little shower tent that was open mostly in the evening time. From this time to this time, you could get your showers. Going to the bathroom was a different story. You either had a pole that you could go number one on, or you used bags to do number two.
Was there any kind of watchtower or any kind of fencing around the base?
We had fences around the base, and then we had 2 guard posts, one on each end of the base, and then we had 2 little guardian angel posts on the mountaintops, which was right above the base.
Why were they called guardian angel posts?
Because you pretty much look for the enemy at a higher altitude, elevation, whatever you want to call it, and see the enemy a little bit better than the guys on the troops. So you could say, hey guys, you got two guys with radios over here at compound 1-1. Okay, all right, cool, thanks. Or hey, we just saw this, heads up. Because being on the ground, you don't have that visual than being on the top.
Was the base on a valley?
Yeah, it was kind of a valley. We were right by the river. The Kajaki Lake was feeding. Yeah.
Were supplies brought in by helicopter?
Yes, they were brought in by Stallions. I don't know what the common term of them are, but I think they were like the Marine Super Stallions.
How long were you at this? What was the name of this base, and how long were you there?
Fob Zubruji. It's the Britons called it that, so that's what it stuck with.
And you were there for how long?
7 months.
Did you ever have any R&R from that, or were you
No.
always there?
We were there. The only R&R we had was in between patrols.
Okay, so your whatever R&R you had was at the base,
Yeah.
and you didn't go someplace else. for
No,
that.
we
Okay.
couldn't go anywhere because we were it. The nearest fob from us was maybe about 15 miles.
Now, when you initially went to this base, did you go to Kabul first and then go to the base, or did you go directly to the base?
We flew into Camp Leatherneck, which just to get us climatized to the area. We were there for a week, and then we flew into our fob, that our home we were going to be staying at for the next 6-7 months.
How many patrols did you actually go on?
11.
Was there any injuries or woundings of your group there?
We had a few casualties, and we had 4 KIAs. It's part of the job. That's what we signed up for. We knew what the price was. The first one was literally our second week there, and it was a EOD personnel found an IED. EOD came out, found the primary pressure plate, found a secondary, didn't realize there was a tertiary, and he
Now,
stepped on it.
Break that down.
Sorry.
First off, an EOD is a what?
Explosive ordnance disposal.
Okay.
And those are the guys that goes out and defuses the bombs.
Okay. So the person who died was an AOD then?
Yes.
Okay, and there was a primary or the first mine of some sort?
It was the first. This particular IED or mine had 3 pressure plates. He found the first one, found the second one, took 2 sets back, then it realized there was a third one.
Although that's not your expertise, was there often 3 pressure points, or is that rather rare to have 3?
From my training, yes, it was kind of rare to have 3. Usually there's 2, but 3, someone took their time with.
Yeah.
So
After leaving after your 7 months, where did you go then?
we went back to Camp Leatherneck to just kind of defuse, and what was funny is because where we were at, you kind of got blasé about some of these sounds, and one morning me and my friends woke up, went to go get chow, and we hear over the intercom, all clear, mortar attack has been finished or whatever. We're just like, oh, did we get attacked? I don't know, but I'm hungry.
Yeah. Now you said we. How many of you would leave at that 7? Was it a good part of the 300 or so?
You would travel in pairs of 2s, but we were just there was a group of like 4 or 5 that we were just waiting for the bus to go get chow, and we had just gotten in that night. We were knocked out.
Yeah. So when they transfer out of the base in the valley there, so not very many are leaving at one time, right?
No, it's about a quarter to a third is going out, but what we're doing at that time is there's a 2-week rip that we call. Once the majority of the unit comes in, we'll send a few squads out with a few of ours. That first week, we show them the ropes. That, hey, this is what we do. This is so and so. Over here, we've had some issues here. This is how you do stuff. And then that next week, it's flipped, where we're watching the new unit come in and say, okay, hey, this is what you need to work on, and then we're out.
What's the highest ranking individual in that base?
Captain.
Cap.
03 or Officer 3. If you really want to get down to it.
Excuse me. So you go from there to Camp Leatherneck. How long are you at Camp Leatherneck?
Just about a week. Just when you're first getting there, is just to acclimatize yourself to the area, because it's a higher altitude, drier, less humid. And then coming back, it's more of just defusing, getting everything squared away, going through customs. Just waiting for the paperwork for your trip home. That's pretty much what you're doing.
Now, when you're back at the base, what seasons were you there?
I was there from, actually I can tell you the days. It was like November 5th of 2010 to say about May 10th of 2011.
What was winter like there?
It was cold. Yeah, you wouldn't think about 40 would feel cold, but it's like 10 here when it's like that. Especially since there's hardly any clouds, so it's really gorgeous at the night, and it's open. There's not a lot of stuff to block the wind. You get that land breeze or sea breeze, and it gets cold.
I think people would be surprised to realize that it was cold there. Most people probably think of Afghanistan as a desert type place.
Yeah. Actually, when my dad came back, he said 60 is cold. I'm going, what? And now being over there, it's like, yeah, 60 is cold.
Yeah.
But it was funny because when we left, it was like 115. Came back here, it's like 80, but the humidity was like 90%, and we're all just like, can we just go back? I mean, it is sticky.
So after your debriefing, both physically and mentally at Camp Leatherneck, where did you go from there?
We came back to Camp Lejeune, and we had a few days off once we got off the buses, so just to be with our families.
How long was your entire enlistment?
4 years.
Okay.
I tried to do more, but they were like, we don't have the room.
The most of you had the 7 months of deployment. Was that toward the front part of your 4 years?
The back
Back.
part.
So prior to that, it's all basically training and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a lot of training, and I was supposed to go on one deployment, and they ran out of room, so I got held back, and I got transferred over, and I was lucky enough to deploy with my last unit, which I wouldn't have traded for the world.
Mm-hmm. So there was a bond you made with the people from that unit.
Yeah, there's a certain bond it's hard to explain, but there's a bond there that to me doesn't feel like you can get anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty remarkable when you're talking to someone who served in World War II or Korea and still have that bond, even though there's those decades, but you can relate, you can talk about it, everything about how things changed or how things were. You can't get that anywhere else, I think, personally.
So now, are you in contact with many of the members of your past unit today?
Yes, well, we are. There's still on Facebook. We have a closed group that we all. Hey, how you guys doing? Hey guys, check it out. I'm having a kid. Hey, I just got married, or it's still that real close. And then when someone is having troubles, we all throw in like, hey, what's up? Here's my number. I have an open door. Come on over. So.
Now, you say you have been in contact with people from other conflicts, whether it be Vietnam or Korea or what have you. Do you feel that those in your generation are more willing to open to other members of that your same generation as to how you're feeling, or were the Korean vets or the Vietnam vets a little bit more inward and didn't open up to anybody?
I think it all depends on what you did. If you were doing paperwork and doing admin, I don't think there's that same persona as someone who went out of the wire. I think it all really comes down to what you did. It's a little easier for someone who was in the infantry now talking to someone who was in the infantry during World War II than it is someone who did admin talking to talking to someone who was in the infantry back then. There's still that connection, but I think the level of deepness isn't quite there. That's just me though.
You've alluded to this a little bit. How do you feel about the 4 years you've served in the Marines?
I want to go back in. I loved it. I thought my time there was well served. I wish I could have done more.
Why would you want it? Why do you feel like you wish you could have done more?
It's just something I've felt. It's something that I'm meant to do. I'm not meant to do anything else. Going overseas, helping people out. That's what I feel like is what I'm supposed to do.
And you feel you were successful in that effort
Yes.
to a certain degree? Yeah.
Yes.
The fact that your family has a rich military history, Do you think that played a very important part in how you feel?
Yes. Yes. There's a sense of pride. So, especially when coming back, talking to my dad and pretty much his brother from his unit, and talking with my grandpa and talking to my great uncle, we can swap stories, and that their wives go, I don't want to hear. We're just like, bye.
Zach, do you have any children?
One
If male or female?
boy.
If he wanted to go in the military, how would you feel about that?
Talk to all of them. I would support it. In fact, I would almost encourage it. But yeah, I would follow through. I would say, hey, just talk to all the branches, get your feel. If you want to do one job, I can say, hey, look more towards it into these.
Special missions. Have you ever in special missions?
Were you involved in any special missions or anything, crucial activities while at the base?
No.
Okay. Was the base involved with anything, or is it just basically routine patrols?
Just a routine patrol, or hey, we caught wind that some a kind of big wig is coming in, so we'll make our presence known.
Were there any special days that you remember? Anything stick out in your mind?
Yeah, actually Christmas Eve. That was probably one of my favorite memories. There is we're trying to make s'mores over a candle. just a group of us. We were like, okay, someone's family's brought in, sent them chocolate and marshmallows and graham crackers, and someone sent them a Christmas tree candles. We're like, let's make s'mores. So.
Well, thanks for sharing your story.
He had mentioned a dog. You had mentioned a dog.
A what?
A dog.
Oh yeah, there were quite a few there.
Well, as far as dogs go, were there strays, or did the company or the group adopt pets?
We had a group of dog handlers whose job was to sniff out the EODs, and actually that was one of our casualties.
Okay, so these are military dogs.
Yes.
Okay.
These are military trained bomb sniffing dogs. And one of our casualties was one of them. Did the job right, landed, just lay down on the pressure plate.
And I imagine, how did the unit react to the death of the dog?
Just the same as any fellow Marine, because that's family. As they would get off patrols, they'll have that hour of just to relax, and you just treat them like any other pet until they are getting ready to go out. Then it's like, okay, it's got a job.
Well, thanks again, Zach, for your willingness to share your story and for your service.
You're very welcome.
Do you have any questions?
No, I'm